An issue that's, in a small state, not as significant, but across the country becomes really significant, gerrymandering. So right now, Congress is filled with representatives who come from districts that have been gerrymandered. They've been gerrymandered to be safe seat districts, which means if you're a Republican in a Republican safe seat, there's no chance the Democrat's going to beat you. If you're a Democrat in a Democrat safe seat, there's no chance the Republican's going to beat you. And what that tends to do is make it so those incumbents are focused almost exclusively on the even more extreme version.
Not getting primaried, yeah.
Yeah, not getting primaried. So if you're a Republican, you're afraid of being primaried by an even more conservative Republican. If you're a Democrat, you're afraid of being primaried by an even more liberal Democrat. And so that dynamic takes an already polarized American Congress and makes it look even more polarized. So it's a really critical problem to figure out, what do we do to reform the system to make it so that kind of gerrymandering doesn't happen? A lot of ideas out there about this, but I wonder if you've thought about this in the list of 400 issues you've actually given us a policy position about.
Well, I couldn't agree more that gerrymandering ends up favoring incumbents in a particular way, and then it also, unfortunately, leads to more polarized policies, because then you're just afraid of the most extreme element of your party trying to challenge you instead of trying to appeal to the middle in that district. And I know that happily that there are some groups working on this problem. I don't have anything innovative to add except to say that to the extent that we can try and pull back some of the redrawn lines to something that is more along with historical norms that would lead to a more demographically or ideologically diverse place, like we should go in that direction as fast as possible.
And so there have been two kinds of solutions that have been pushed. The most common has been at the state level. So for example, Michigan recently passed a ballot initiative because a millennial put a Facebook post up immediately after the last election. Katie Fahey put this Facebook post up and said, anybody want to work on gerrymandering in Michigan? And within 6 months, she had 5,000 volunteers in Michigan who collected more than 400,000 signatures to get a ballot initiative on that ballot, and then Michigan overwhelmingly voted to end partisan gerrymandering in Michigan, evincing what I think is a really important fact, that the people desperately support this kind of reform. And the most interesting principle that Katie Fahey brought to that fight was nonpartisanship. Nobody was allowed to utter anything about their partisan affiliation in that fight. It was a pure citizens first fight. So that's the grassroots. But the interesting alternative, which Congress has recently considered in the H.R. 1 proposal, is for Congress itself to say, you can't draw congressional lines using partisan gerrymandering as your principle. And so I wonder whether between these two, you have any clear sense of which you would push for, or which do you think makes sense?
Well, certainly, if Congress, and H.R. 1 I support just about every single aspect of that bill, and I'm furious at the fact that the Republican-led Senate is quashing its consideration. And so if we can make that happen legislatively, then that could have, because you can't expect there to be a Katie Fahey in every state or every district, it's like, and that's actually something I find maddening when someone's like, let some activists somehow organize thousands of people. It's like when that happens, it's fantastic, but we need to build a better functioning government than that doesn't require there to be an army of activists in every district or every state. So as you can tell, I'm for the legislative solution.
So you want to get to this solution as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I mean, we're, as you all can sense, we're like decades behind or years behind in many of these areas. So it's one of those things where it's like, the best time to have done it would have been 20 years ago. But failing that, we should do it as soon as possible.
Okay. And so one really exciting thing about these democracy forums is that our next round of them are in the beginning of May. And Katie Fahey is going to be a co-host with these because she is deeply committed to this reform movement as well. And so I think she also would love to see it as quickly as possible from the federal level, but when the federal government's not doing it, you got to do it yourself.
And I will suggest that this is, because I think New Hampshire is, I'm happy to say, more drawn to this, but you can kind of tell, I'm a non-politician and a systems thinker, and I see the system, it's like, hey, we should really do something about that. And I don't have any vested interests. And I'm going to suggest that it might take someone who has no investment in a given system to help fix it, and then so that other people like who might have, frankly, a ton of debts or obligations like in the existing system, that they might not like it, but they might not be able to do something about it, whereas someone like me can do something about it as fast as possible.
Yeah, and that was certainly one of the most effective things the president did in the 2016 election, was to be able to stand up there and say, look, I'm not like any of you. In fact, I've bought most of you because most of you are politicians, and I've given all of you money. And whether or not one believed what he was saying or believed that his commitment to reform was genuine, what was important is it demonstrated how significant it is to the voters that they see somebody who's interested in fixing the system who's not themselves a part of the system. And I take it this is going to be the biggest push for your kind of candidacy.
Yeah, that's why I love it. I can't believe it takes courage to point out what everyone already knows. When you said that, I was like, really? Like, that seems so odd.
Okay, so